Hello and welcome to another edition of What Does the Giraffe Say Media with me, Kathleen Ritorne. We're an organisation that aims to connect people in conservation and animal welfare by holding live interviews on social media. Today, I am very happy to be joined by animal advocate Dominic Dyer. So Dominic, you've had quite a varied career and you moved from politics and industry into wildlife protection and animal welfare. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the decision was behind this and how did your previous careers kind of help give the animals a voice?
Yes, I sort of joined the civil service government work when I was 17 in the United Kingdom. I was just fortunate, really. I went through a clearing system for an admin assistant, a junior clerk position, and I could have ended up anywhere. But when I did the interview and they offered me the job, they sent me to the Ministry of Agriculture. And the first job I actually got was helping lawyers dealing with animal prosecutions for cruelty cases. I remember the first case was at a Crown Court, Lincoln Crown Court, for a farmer that had illegally poisoned a dog. So straight away, from the very beginning of my career in government, I was sort of working on issues that I still very much focus on today as well. And I sort of went on to do a lot of different work in Britain and Brussels and trade issues and agriculture and farming and food production, and got more involved in sort of working in the political field as well. So I spent 13 years working in Whitehall, but I learned an awful lot about government and about the environment and the systems of food production and issues around animal welfare and protection in that time. And that's really the basis of where my sort of interest has come from, where I'm working today. I sort of left in 2000 to go and work in the food industry, in the food and drink manufacturing sector for a body called the Food and Drink Federation. But in that area of work, I sort of went into the early stages of the plant-based food revolution, really. So started working with companies like Alpro, Corn, Linda McCartney Foods, and sort of looking at how they were producing a wide range of vegetarian and vegan foods for a growing market, and started to get more involved traveling around the world, looking at the whole issues of dietary trends, the environment and food production, intensive livestock versus less intensive organic systems, how plant-based foods could play a greater role in diet and health issues. And for 8 years, really, I sort of was one of the sort of pioneering voices for what is now a very significant part of the food market around the world, food and drink market. I left Food and Drink Federation in 2008 to become chief executive of the Crop Protection Association. So that's a much more controversial but important area of work in terms of plant science, the use of genetic modification for plant science, the use of pesticides, issues around plant breeding, working with big companies like Monsanto and Syngenta and Dow Chemicals and other companies that people will know around the world that at times, are controversial in what they're doing, but it's a very important part of agriculture and food system. So during that time I worked there, I traveled to Africa a great deal, China, Japan, and other parts of the world, North and South America, and started to look at this rapidly changing world we're living in terms of how many people there are, how we feed them, how we protect the land we've got left, how we can do it more sustainably, taking account of all the energy, water usage, and climate change issues that obviously are becoming crucially important to us today. It's that period of time where I started to get more involved in charity work. I joined the trustee board of an organization called Care for the Wild International that did quite a lot of work in Kenya, particularly with the Kenyan Wildlife Service, desnaring in the national parks and issues like that. So when I was in Africa, as I did spend quite a bit of time in the crop protection industry, I used to also, drop in and see some of the charity projects that we were supporting, and also then started to write and talk a bit more about poaching of elephants and things like that. So I started to sort of get more involved using some of my skills in communication, lobbying in the animal welfare area, but more from a voluntary position at that time. But in 2012, I decided just to sort of break with a highly paid lobbying career in industry and actually go and work full time in animal protection work. Take a big cut in salary, but then take the skills and knowledge I had and start working on different issues from UK wildlife protection to international. And that's really where I've been. So the last 10 years, I've sort of thrown the kitchen sink of all that I learned in government industry at wildlife protection issues, which has to a degree put me in a bit more of a unique position compared to many other people, which has probably allowed me to gain recognition and a louder voice and a more effective influencer as a result of some of that as well.
And do you think as well, from your time in government, you've obviously been able to see behind the scenes how things work. Do you think that's then allowed you to be more effective when it comes to trying to get them to create change?
Yes, I think, if you know how government works, you know how ministers operate, how civil servants brief, because I've done that type of work. If you've been used to working in a political environment, then it does benefit you when you're trying to think about animal issues. Animal issues are extremely political. When I worked in industry, particularly in controversial areas like crop protection, I thought I was, at a sort of a point in my career where this was, really heavy political controversial stuff, but there's nothing like working in animal areas. Bovine TB and badgers that I still work on in the UK, hugely controversial issue here. The ivory trade, whaling, the use of animals for testing, so many different things that I get involved with that have huge implications for how government work, how industries work, how whole countries, operate. So, you're right in the edge of that sort of key issue of sort of concern between people who care about animals, politicians who want to be seen to care about animals, and the political issues surrounding them. And they're never ending, and in many ways just getting worse, to be quite frank, because we cause more destruction to this world and more suffering to the animal kingdom as well.
And why do you think it is so difficult and kind of controversial? Is it because there's so much, people have a lot of money that is behind this, it's culture? What are the main things that you're finding there?
I think we often come up against, vested interests. Things have always been done this way, and we don't necessarily want to change it. Or this particular animal has no real value, so why are we concerned about destroying it? Or so-called culture, which is really little more than cruelty that's driving something that's seen as a tradition. So you've got lots of different things going on in these debates and discussions, and often you're trying to find a middle way through it and say, listen, actually, we should be able to deal with the natural world better. We should be able to reduce the level of destruction or cruelty that we inflict on animals, be they domestic animals, be they wild animals. You get this debate across the board. At times it can be very frustrating, but I do take heart from the fact that more and more people do care about animal issues. The reactions I see to my work globally and in the UK is significant. The level of media attention they get. I'm, doing media interviews most days of the week on animal issues. It might be Freya the walrus, which I did a few days ago, or it might be about the use of a goat for a particular music festival in Kerry in Ireland that caused a huge explosion of anger, a very traditional thing about putting a goat in a cage and raising it up above the stage in a music festival, which actually sent, many people, particularly younger generation Ireland, ballistic this year and became front page news for a week in Ireland. Or it might be about, badgers, as I was speaking about yesterday, the ongoing culling of badgers in Britain, the heat wave and the impact on wildlife. So there's never a day when I'm not talking about something relating to animals in the media, or there's political issues around animals. And I take heart from that. It means that no one can really avoid those issues, and it keeps me busy, but the level of passion and concern is not dying down.
And what do you think is behind that? Do you think people are becoming more aware of the impact that humans are having on animals, and maybe the things like social media, for example, are kind of giving a bigger platform for people to say, actually, no, this isn't okay?
Yeah, I think social media has been a big factor in it. We can share images and we can exchange views far more quickly. And it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? In some cases, it can be really beneficial. In some ways, it drives, anger, and that anger can go in different ways into threats and intimidation and more negative stuff. So controlling what's done on social media is difficult, but it's a very useful way of connecting people together and immediately having an impact. Things like Cecil the Lion that I worked on as a story back in 2015 exploded into one of the biggest stories I'd ever dealt with as a result of social media primarily driving it. Now's out the evacuation of Pen Farthing from Afghanistan, which will be a documentary going out on Channel 4 in the UK at 10 o'clock on Monday, because we've been a lot of work I've done over the last 6 months into that project, had become a massive story, during the summer of last year, that knocked the government sideways and then basically resulted in a significant political scandal that to a degree has contributed to the resignation of Boris Johnson, and he'll leave Downing Street a week after this documentary is broadcast. So these stories can become huge and they can catch the imagination of the world, and they're very driven by our emotional connection with animals, be it in a war zone, be it because of cruelty in the case of what happens with Cecil the Lion or Freya the walrus, or be it because of how we farm and agriculture systems, or the use of animals for testing of cosmetics and other things. These issues never cease to sort of arise and cause a lot of concern in that sense.
And you mentioned then, we was talking just now about the Nauseds evacuation, for example, and the huge kind of blowout that happened from that. Were you surprised at the reactions that got there? I mean, there was negative reactions where people were saying the animals were getting better treatment than the humans. Then there was the whole political side and people saying that it was not necessarily kind of confirming their part in the whole process. What was your take on that? And did it surprise you how it all kind of blew up?
Yeah, it was an incredibly difficult 2 weeks for Penn and his people on the ground in Kabul, but also for people like me that were trying to manage it all from here. None of us slept, I think, for 2 weeks, and it was highly stressful. It played out in this sort of social media and the media world. It was the biggest story I've ever been involved with. And it went in different directions. It sort of became a big social media campaign. I think my social media in those 2 weeks in August reached 80 million people. Which, you look at the analytics, is incredible. And it knocked the government sideways, and Penn Farthings was similar. So we were getting the sort of level of coverage through our own social media channels that a lot of broadcasting networks could only dream of. It was being driven that powerfully, huge amounts of interest. The dogs did become a driver, and that's in this documentary. I say that without the dogs, we wouldn't have been able to connect with people, to raise the money. We wouldn't have been able to get the political or media impact that we wanted to lift the people out of there. I think the tragedy about Nowzad was that there were so many other people that were in many ways a priority and more deserving to get out that got nowhere, but they didn't have dogs and they didn't have the ability to reach to the people that we reached. Politically or in the media, that we were able to do. And I used my skills and knowledge to do that. And I threw the kitchen sink at it. But ultimately, it did result in the government and the prime minister intervening to give visas to the 67 people to get out, but also for a billionaire to give us the $500,000 for an aircraft, and for the government to give authorization to put it down on the ground in Kabul so that we can actually get people and animals moving. In fact, we never got the people on the plane because Taliban didn't let them through the entry point to the airport. They had to come out via a land corridor 10 days later, but Penn and his animals came out. The fact that Penn and his animals came out of that airport, though, and no people were on that aircraft is hugely controversial, because thousands of people were on the other side of the wall and couldn't get anywhere, and some of those people unfortunately could have been killed since. So the controversy over this pets before people thing will never die down as a result of that. But it really wasn't in our hands. We were in this sort of crisis situation. I think if the people had got out on the plane and all arrived with the animals, I think the story would have been very different.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we've discussed it a little bit as we've been talking about the fact that you do have a large following on the social medias, and you're also kind of a go-to representative on the media if things are happening in terms of animal welfare. Now that has its good and its bad side. So the good side is you have got this big audience that you can reach. But then the bad side of it is obviously you then get the trolls and the people with the negative comments and that kind of stuff. What advice would you give to someone who wants to kind of add their voice to these causes, but maybe a little bit apprehensive or nervous about being targeted with all the negativity that can sometimes come along with that?
There's two things, really. Firstly, yes, there can be negativity. You have to be aware that if you stick your head above parapet, people will come after you, and that can get nasty and can be quite horrible. So that is just part of that process. I think that's the same with anyone that has a profile in any corner of this world, to be quite frank, these days. It comes with the territory. The other thing, though, there's a responsibility, and I've struggled with this. There are times when you say things and do things in the heat of the moment that can actually have an impact on other people, and you don't think about that at the time. And it's something that, I've had to come to terms with about last August. There was a story before Nowzad, which was Geronimo the alpaca, which became a big story in the UK and around the world about this one animal that I was very much at the center of pushing in the media, and exploded into front page news in Britain and other parts of the world. But at times, I was saying things that I look back on that I think I wasn't really thinking other than being angry and emotional. And those words that I was using was leading to potential intimidation of people trying to get their job done in government, and threats. And I don't want that to happen. Equally, during Nowzad, when you were involved in the heat of this debate, and you were being maybe attacked or held to, to account by ministers and powerful people in government, you tended to push back. But some of the things I said in the heat of the moment, when I look back at it, I think actually, no, I shouldn't really have said that. And that in turn made other people's lives difficult. So I think there's a responsibility. And that's one of the things I would say to people is always think about how you carry yourself and what you do. And usually I get it right, but there are times when I've got it wrong. And there has been consequences as a result of that, particularly when you get this massive amount of media exposure. And the older I get, the more I think now about actually, I do want to be passionate. I do want to get my message across, but I don't want to see that result in threats and intimidation to people, even if I disagree with them. But it's a fine line and it can easily happen. Or you can feed other people to take that course of action. So I think that's one of the big responsibilities that you have if you have a following or you have influence, or you're an effective, I'm an effective communicator, so I can rile people up on the street or I can rile them up in the media. But you have a responsibility about how you use that power and influence. And I think that's just something that I'm coming to terms with more the older I get, I suppose.
And I guess you're right as well. It is difficult when you are very passionate about something to kind of try and sometimes take a step back and see about what the repercussions could be. We got a question coming through from Jason. Hi, Jason. And he's asking if you believe that the extreme veganism and animal rights groups can do more harm than good with some of the ways that they kind of promote their work.
Yeah, I've had that discussion quite a lot over the years, and I've been attacked to a degree by some more extreme elements in the vegan movement because I'm not vegan. I'm vegetarian, but I'm not vegan. That doesn't mean I don't have great respect for vegans. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't like to be vegan myself, even though I think there are still some challenges for me at a personal level to get to that point all the time and be able to keep to that. But I think veganism in itself is a very good thing, and I think all of us should be moving towards that form of consumption and reducing the meat and dairy consumption because there are benefits for us nutritionally, there are massive benefits for the planet, and obviously reducing the impact on animals and the suffering on it. But I think if you look through everything through the prism of veganism, then I think you begin to drive people away, not bring them together. So if you say to people, unless you're vegan, you can't have a voice for protecting animals, I don't agree with that. If you say that, if you promote protection of a certain animal, you're species. Yeah, I am species all the time, to be honest with you, because I get on board and get behind concerns about certain animals, and I push that agenda. So I'll hold up my hands and say I am species to a degree. But, I want to try and play a part where I can in relieving and reducing suffering. Veganism has a significant role to play, but there are many vegans, for example, that have a lifestyle of veganism, but are not necessarily that concerned about the environment. To them, it's more a nutrition lifestyle issue. There are some that believe it's completely part of their life and they don't want any suffering for animals, and I hugely respect that. But sometimes it can get a bit extreme, and I often think it's a minority because most vegans I work with and know are very, very compassionate, good people, and get heavily involved in working with lots of people that are not vegan and are very happy to do that. There are bigger challenges. I'm interested in the debate about the pet food sector, which accounts for 25% of industrial livestock production around the world. And, there are many of us who are vegan or vegetarian who are feeding our dogs meat-based food products or cats meat-based food products. And there are difficulties, particularly with cats, to find alternatives. It's easier to a degree for dogs, but we have to think about that. We have to shift it over. Is it insect-based protein that we develop foods on? Is it, cultured meat that we produce, or is it plant-based foods? But, to me, the whole idea of companion animals remain terribly important. But ultimately also the suffering and the environmental consequences of feeding all animals to animals has to be looked at as well. So I think the veganism side of the debate is crucially important. The trends and the interests in that sector is something that goes way back for me in the food industry. But yeah, I would agree. I think a sort of radical approach that our system is the only fit to this is not particularly helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. I think the more you try and force some people to do things, the more further away they're going to go away from doing that. We got another question coming through from Alison. Hi, Alison. And she's asking, what impact do you think the next Prime Minister, whoever that is going to be, will have on animal welfare?
I think, we're in a problem with our current government. I think Boris Johnson, to a degree, understood some of the concerns that the public had about animal welfare. His father had a track record of work in that area. His wife and partner, who I knew before they were together and worked with during that relationship, was very much of the view that this was important both to her, but also to his political career. And to a degree, it was part of what he set out his stall to do. But a lot of promise and not much delivery, I'm afraid. Most of the animal welfare reforms and agenda that Boris Johnson pushed forward with have not been implemented. Liz Truss, who's really going to be the next Prime Minister, I have worked with in the past when she was Environment Secretary, I don't think will give much more of a priority to it. I think probably we've reached peak animal welfare delivery under this current government. So the next 2 years, whatever it is, the next election, I don't think we're going to get a lot out of that at all. We're in a massive economic crisis, as many parts of the world are. The focus is not on these issues. It's on short-term energy crisis, rising living costs and all that. But saying that, I think the next election, these issues will be important in Britain. We brought 10,000 people to the gates of Downing Street in 2017 against Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister at the time's commitment to repeal the Hunting Act. And that basically lost her majority to a degree at the election, alongside a failure to sort of commit on the Ivory Trade that was in the manifesto prior to her election campaign. So I think, these issues do resonate with voters, not just young voters, but voters across all parties. The next election, they'll be important, and we will campaign on them. And any party that ignores them will do so at its peril. Will Labour form a coalition? Possibly, but we can't take it for granted things will be better. We have to work hard to get them to implement change. animal issues are one of the most important and regular issues of concern raised with MPs across Britain. But often they don't result in significant change. And what we've got to do is turn that political power into change. And I think that's where we've got much more work to do.
Yeah. And we've touched on a couple of the topics that you've been quite vocal in terms of trying to raise awareness of some of the issues that are going on. And you've obviously got a good reputation and you've got a powerful voice. How do you choose which topics that you want to kind of put your voice behind?
Yeah, I tend to think about it a bit strategically. I can't do everything, and people contact me daily on so many different things, and often I just can't even respond, which I feel guilty about, but I can't commit to anything. So I'm not able to add to the list of issues I deal with. So at the moment, I'm dealing with commercial imports of dogs from Eastern Europe, which is a big issue, which we're trying to resolve because there's a temporary ban in place, partly down to the Ukraine conflict, where I've also been involved in helping set up a new scheme to allow refugees to come in with their dogs and cats. So that's something else we worked on earlier this year, which has proved very successful. I'm working at the moment on the Faroes, which is an area where we're trying to engage with the Faroese government and the broader community on the Faroes to get them to stop killing whales and dolphins and to look at the trade relationship they have with Britain and America and Europe. And actually, the last few days I've had an invitation to travel out to the Faroes and to meet with key people on the islands, including the government, which I'm now currently looking at doing prior to going to the International Whaling Convention in Slovenia in October to actually host a debate with all sides coming together on this, the Faroese view and the international view, and to see if we can really begin to look at all of this issue, the complexities of culture, of the economy, of history, plus the issues of real concern that I have about the cruelty, about the fact that this could potentially have significant impacts on the overall population of small crustaceans, the fact that this shouldn't be happening in one of the richest island nations on the world. So that's another big part of work that's suddenly growing at the moment. Bovine TB and badgers continues to be an issue that I work on. And, there's lots of other things, from bear fur hats in the British military that I've been campaigning and working on. A lot of what I do, or fox hunting, is with other NGOs. I sit on the board of Wildlife Countryside Link, which is an umbrella group of NGOs, all the big ones from WWF and Greenpeace and everything. And I'm part of that. I work with the Born Free Foundation. I support organizations like League Against Cruel Sports and others. And I sit as a lay member on the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, Veterinary Nurses Council. So from veterinary issues on one side to, wildlife protection, animal welfare on the other, I have an interesting life. Last week I spent 2 days in the front line of a veterinary surgery in Britain with vets and vet nurses and animal care assistants, just looking at what they were doing, which was absolutely fascinating for me, just to learn a bit more about the front line of animal care in veterinary practice. So, I'm fortunate I get an opportunity to do those types of things.
And I think the organisations are fortunate for having you as well, because you certainly do provide a great platform. We've got a question coming through from Winnie, kind of feeding in from the comments on the Faroe Islands. And she's asking, do you think they will ever stop the killings?
I want to understand what's going on there. I think the most difficult thing for me at the moment is that it's very easy to shout about how cruel it is and terrible it is, but then you have to understand what drives it. And I can't understand at the moment what's driving the level of killing and the blatant cruelty of it. And that's one of the reasons why I'm going to go to the Faroes and take a cameraman and speak to the government, the whalers, everyone involved in a spirit of mutual confidence and respect. That's difficult, because I strongly disagree with them and they disagree with me. I'm not popular on the islands, but they've reached out and I've said, okay, let's do this. I'll come over and let's talk about it. Because if I'm going to debate this in Slovenia, then I want to know what it is that I'm talking about from your perspective, as well as where I sit, or people like Chris Packham that I'm working on coming out to Slovenia, a well-known naturalist broadcaster with us. So, so that's a big challenge, but also an opportunity and an interesting one, because I never expected they would open up like that. I didn't think that hunters and the government would reach out to me saying, actually, we'd like you to come and talk with us. So clearly there is a debate to be had. Clearly there are concerns about what the future holds for the islanders. Clearly there are concerns that these trade issues could become complicated if they go on. Do I think this killing will stop in the near future? No. Do I think there is a future where we won't see this mass killing of whales and dolphins? Yes, possibly there could be, but we are going to have to work hard on trying to understand better what the drivers are on the islands to continue this. And that's one of the things I've really got to do, despite the difficulties that will cause for me, I think, from an emotional point of view in that sense.
And that kind of feeds quite nicely into my next question as well, because you are obviously very passionate about this, and you do get emotionally attached to them, to the projects that you're championing. And conservation can be quite a bleak kind of industry to be in, and quite heavy on the heart. If you're having a bad day or anything like that, what keeps you motivated, and what advice would you give to someone who's trying to kind of find some positivity to keep going?
I think sometimes you do have to switch off a little bit from it.
Yeah.
I think times just enjoy nature for what it is around you, because one thing that concerns me often is I don't actually look at it enough. I talk about it a lot, in places like this and stuff, and actually go out there and look at it and enjoy it for what it is. So I think the lockdowns that we all went through during COVID actually took us back to the natural world more. We shouldn't lose sight of how important that is. I love my dog, companion animals. I just love seeing wildlife in the areas where I live. So I think all of that to me is terribly important. And I think sometimes just switch off the social media side, because it can be so negative and so upsetting, and try and see the positives. Like sometimes I just like sharing beautiful images of wildlife and animals on my feed, rather than all the terrible negative stuff that I see constantly about all the suffering. And I think that's one of the things that we do. And when I was in the vet surgery last week, it was just great, because you were just seeing amazing stories. Yeah. Just people coming in with their animals at all stages of life, and tears and laughter and smiles. And that to me is what it's all about. It's just helping people whose animals are so important to their lives to feel better. And I think that those are the things that keep me going.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. We've got a question, another one from Alison, actually asking, with so many people struggling financially at the moment, what else can people do to help animals?
I think it's really difficult. The money is coming out of people's pockets at an unprecedented rate, and the charity sector already is really struggling. I know, looking at charity budgets across the board, it is tumbling, the income level. That means fundamentally that many charities might go under. Many will have to cut back on the work they do through projects or staff levels. It's going to be very, very hard. In terms of companion animals, lots of people are going to give them up because they can't afford to keep them anymore. The pet bills, the food bills, the pet insurance, all of it is problematic. Animal rescue abroad is going to take a massive hit. It's going to be a human and animal crisis that we face as a result of this global economic crisis that's playing out in Britain and most other parts of the world. It's going to be a very, very difficult time. All I can say to people is this: if you have a small donation you make to a charity and you care about it, try and keep it going if you can. Or if you can't, maybe just do what you can to keep promoting them so other people might give. But, just think about where you can do things, volunteer and help. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough anywhere at the moment. Could you volunteer for a local animal sanctuary? If you can, do it, because they're going to find it really hard to keep going.
Yeah, that's good advice as well, the volunteering side. So sometimes your time is actually just as important as your money. And everyone's got different skills that they can bring as well. So even if it's just helping them on the social media or trying to raise awareness in different ways, and there's plenty people can do without having to stretch themselves financially. Okay, so I've only got a couple of questions left for you, Dominic. The one thing that I was going to ask, which I think is going to be quite a difficult one for you to answer, if you could change one thing for animals and wildlife, what would you do?
Yeah, I think I would probably, at the moment, set up a system by which the international community would fund the protection of what we've got left of the world's wildernesses. So it would be a levy effectively on developed countries, maybe through a UN body, by which money would be directly invested in protecting what's left of our wildlife, particularly in the developing world. And we'd protect it from exploitation and destruction and unnecessary hunting and cruelty. We would leave the existing wilderness as wilderness, and we'd allow researchers to enter it to do various research, but we would generally keep people out of it and let animals just be animals in a place where we're not destroying everything around them. And I think we have a duty to do that. And you know what? We don't need that much money to do it. We're only talking billions, not trillions, to be spent wisely that could protect what is so, so precious. So that's what I'd like to see, an international commitment to a biodiversity fund that could actually practically protect what's left of our wildernesses.
And by doing so is protecting us to continue being able to survive as well, because without it, we're not going to be lasting for much longer either.
No, exactly. No.
Okay, so the last question for you, Dominic. What are your hopes for the future, and what ways, if people watching back home, how can they help support some of the work that you're doing?
I think, my hopes for the future is for the next generation of people. I'm at a certain age now where, I'm looking the next 30 years, I might be clocking off from this world. I'm trying, and I have invested quite a lot of my time in younger campaigners, you know, many of which were 12, 13 when I started working with them, are now 20 plus, and they're becoming amazing broadcasters, writers, and they're popping up all over the place. I was at an event recently in London, and one of them, Cambridge University, brilliant advocate, great speaker, James Miller. Bella Lack is another person I've worked with. There was a great article on her in the Observer in British newspapers last weekend in the magazine about her being one of the key environmental influences of her generation. You know, I've worked with these people when they were really young and got them involved in various issues I was dealing with, and have seen them grow into the people they are. That's what gives me hope. I was at London University recently with a Born Free event, and hundreds of students from 12, 14 years of age, and I spoke about all my campaign work to them, and they were fascinated and engaged and interested. If we can get them to take the issues I'm concerned about seriously and to step up, they'll be the influencers of tomorrow. So to me, that's the most important thing for the future.
Excellent. I think you summed it up perfectly there. I think the next generation coming through are hopefully going to do a better job than our generations and the ones before us.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for coming on, Dominic. I've had absolutely loved having you on the show. Totally fascinating conversations, and you're doing such incredible work. If you're interested in seeing some of the work that Dominic's doing, you can follow him across on his social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the usual ones, and you'll be able to see the different things that he's been campaigning and talking about. Is there anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye?
Not at all. Thank you, Kathleen. It's great to come and to share my ideas and beliefs and thoughts with you. And thank you so much for setting up the platform. It's great to contribute to it. Well done.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for watching back home, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.